Hey guys, welcome to this session on Introduction to Responsive Web Design, HTML and CSS tutorial. So in this session, we'll take a look at what responsive web design actually means, and we'll take a look at how to implement it using HTML and CSS through the helps of several demos. Responsive web design is one of the most important concepts when it comes to creating a web page or creating an entire layout for a website. But it's quite difficult to wrap your head around. It's a little difficult to demystify all the concepts. So we are here to help you with that. So if you're confused about what responsive web design is or how to get started with it, this is the session for you. So without further ado, let's take a look at the agenda for the session. So the first thing that we'll take a look at is HTML. Then we'll move on to taking a look at what CSS is. Then we'll take a look at the different types of web design available to us and how those different types of web design fit together with each other. Then we'll take a look at responsive design, which is the main focus of our presentation today. Then we'll take a look at why would you want to create a responsive web design, the benefits that it provides you. And then we'll take a look at the elements that make up a responsive web design. So there are several key elements that when you incorporate in your design for your web page or your website, then you get a responsive web design. So we'll take a look at that. And finally, we'll have a few demos to really consolidate and really solidify the underlying concepts of the elements that we previously discussed about the web design thing that can make your entire web page responsive. So let's begin by understanding HTML. As we all know, HTML stands for Hypertext Markup Language. So it's by its name, it's quite clear that it's just a markup language that is used to define the structure and the content of our web page. So to give you an example, whenever we're trying to create an HTML page, all we're doing is we are using tags, which are special keywords wrapped inside special angle brackets that make our content more readable and accessible to a web browser. If you were to just put everything as a plain text and save it in a HTML format, it will still run on the web browser, but it won't have any context of what it actually is. If it's a header, if it's a paragraph, it's a header, then what should be the level of the heading? Is it the most important heading, the second most, third most, so on and so forth. So to make this understandable by the browser, we need to use something called HTML. HTML basically allows you to structure your content using a predefined markup language. It's very easy to use and very easy to get started with as well. Then there's CSS. CSS can be thought of as the companion to HTML. CSS stands for Cascading Style Sheets. It is used to control the styling and layout of the elements on a web page. So when we create an HTML page, it looks quite plain because of the default styling that a web browser applies on it. But when we are creating an HTML page, what we want is to apply our own styles. We want to style our paragraphs a certain way. We want to style our HTML code, H1 tags in our HTML code a particular way. We want to make our forms look a little nicer. We want the buttons to look a little different. All of that is taken care of by CSS. And we have to use CSS in order to target the HTML elements that we created to make sure that we are targeting the right elements and then we are applying the correct styles for them to look nice. Then let's take a look at types of web design. So there are several types of web design available. How does responsive web design fit into it? So think of it as sort of an evolution of web design and how does responsive web design come about? So majorly there are three types of web design. The first one is static. When the web began, the styling was not really a big part of it. It was just HTML content served on over the wire. As the web grew, styling became important, so people started using CSS to create styles for a web page. Now, the thing with CSS was that it was only going to support the web browser. So HTML, CSS were only supporting desktop browsers. So they didn't have a lot of screen sizes to deal with. So that worked fine for a while. And many web applications that were built specifically for desktop resolutions, such as standard desktop resolution. They would check three or four resolutions, and if it looked nice, and if it did, then they would just use those styles that they had created. Now, after that, the mobile internet came about, and it had several challenges along with it. So the content that looks good on your desktop screen, which is a larger screen than on your mobile screen, is not going to look that nice on the mobile screen, mainly because of the constrained view area. So the form factor of your mobile application, the screen on your mobile application is going to be quite different from the screen on your desktop. So mobiles like iPhones and Google's Android phones, they have quite a different screen size than your desktop or laptops. So what happens is the content that looks good on one kind of screen might not look great on the other kind of screen. Things might be mashing up against each other. They might not be appropriately spaced. There could be a lot of different issues. So to deal with this issue, people came up with something called adaptive design. That basically meant that they decided to create a few breakpoints. Breakpoints are essentially just a resolution. We define that, okay, at this particular width, we are going to convert, if the screen size is lesser than this width, then we are going to convert our entire site into a mobile site. If it's larger than that width, then we are going to convert it into a tablet website. And if it's even larger, then we'll convert it to a desktop website. Now that works fine. And if you remember correctly, previously in the when Facebook began its application, it had created a Facebook website which is still active, I believe. It's the URL of that was m.facebook.com, that was built specifically for mobile users. So at the time when that was launched, JavaScript was not really a big part. CSS was not really that big of a deal, and so you could use that quite easily in mobile application. But it wasn't something that gives you the best user experience. And also another problem would be that we would have to maintain three different kinds of style sheets in order to deal with three different kinds of screens. And what if the screen size increases? So there are like larger tablets and smaller tablets, greater phones, smaller phones. So the lines become blurry before this. So we come up with another technique called responsive web design. The responsive web design model takes the best ideas from adaptive and static web design and adds few bits more onto it. So we keep the things that work fine, and responsive web design basically means first you create your website and then you try shrinking your screen to smaller and smaller sizes. If some content starts looking a little not a little out of the line, if it starts looking some like the thing that you don't want it to look like, if it starts overlapping with images, if there are certain issues with the layout, you fix them and then you keep shrinking the screen to the mobile size. So as your screen size decreases, your mobile application or the web application's layout will adapt or respond to the site that you have created. So instead of it depending on the size of the screen that you are on, it depends on the size of the view, the how much size is available for the content to be rendered on, and that's how responsive web design comes about. So now let's take a look at responsive design in a bit more detail. So responsive design is an approach to web design that makes web page render well on variety of devices and windows or screen sizes. So as we discussed earlier, instead of defining breakpoints and deciding one style sheet or one particular kinds of style would apply on a web page when it's being viewed on desktop, and the other sides will be applied on a website when it's being viewed on a mobile screen, is not really something that's feasible anymore because of the different sizes of screens available and the variety of ways that people use those screens. They could be in portrait or landscape or whatever. So to tackle this, we come up with responsive design in which we make sure that our content adjusts its layout depending on how wide or how narrow the screen size is. Because of the constrained area to lay out the content, the screen should also shift to the size of the things as well as the layout or the positioning of the things. That's what responsive web design does. It allows us to create these kinds of styles for our application. So why would you want to use responsive design? Now, responsive design provides several advantages. These are few of the advantages that we're discussing, but if these advantages sort of compel you to do it, then you should. First one is mobile traffic. So responsive design makes our website easier for mobile users to navigate, which increases mobile traffic. Nowadays, most of the websites are being accessed by mobile phones. So if you don't have a responsive design, then your mobile phone might not be able to render your website correctly. And that could turn off a huge customer base, and that could be a really big problem. So in order to solve a problem like this, you need to create a website that's optimized to be viewed on a mobile site, and responsive design greatly helps with that. Then comes faster pages. So when we say faster pages, we're not just talking about the loading speed, although loading speed is a big factor of it. With the responsive website, we can use modern performance techniques such as caching and responsive image display, which will improve the web page loading speed. But another thing that it could improve regarding the faster pages is the navigation model and the snappiness of your application. So in the earlier models, what you would do is you would take a look at the link. A link would have underlines, so you would click on the link and it will take you to another page. Nowadays, what you can do is you can click on a link, and instead of it taking you to another page, it can just fetch a website, and it feels more authentic of an experience. So you can take a look at that as well. Then it has lower bounce rates. So lower bounce rates basically means that a responsive of an optimized mobile site can provide much better user experience to a visitor than an unoptimized and a website that's static or adaptive. So that would be important for many customers, and when they first visit your website, they would not be turned off by the slow loading speeds or not being able to find the content that they're looking for. So they won't be turned away from your product, and that would be really helpful for you. So you can take a look at that. Then comes higher conversion rates. So having a single secure website that looks professional on all platforms makes it the users less likely to get frustrated and turn to a competitor. So if you have a product that you want to sell on a web page and that product is in a competitive market, then you need to have a responsive website, because that would get the chances of converting a potential customer to an actual customer quite higher. So you can take a look at responsive design if you're trying to sell things on in a competitive environment on the internet. And finally, improved SEO. So if all of the above advantages don't apply to you, this one might. So improved SEO basically means that a responsive web design becomes as important for search engine optimization and quality content. So think about it this way. When most of the people who are searching the internet are going to be looking at it through a web browser that is on their mobile phone, it's going to be much easier for you to create a website that's optimized for that experience, that would create the good user experience that the users are looking for, as well as that would make your site more reliable in the eyes of search engines and web crawlers. Many web crawlers even take a look at different screen sizes of your application to see whether or not it's accessible, whether or not it's displayed correctly, whether or not it has the things that we need to take a look at. Many factors are taken into account when the SEO ranking of your application or your web page is generated. One of them is the accessibility thing. So that's why you need to be completely sure that you're using responsive web design, and the reason you're using it is because you want many of the advantages that we have discussed so far, including improved SEO. So now let's take a look at design elements for responsive design. So responsive design has several elements. First one is the viewport. Now, just as discussed before, the static and the adaptive design thought process takes a look at the screen, not the screen size, but the size of the device. So however much the size on the device is available, that's the size that we design our website keeping in mind. Now the thing is that we can shrink our browsers. Now there's picture-in-picture mode available that we can shrink sizes of browsers or any other tab in our mobile applications as well. So to be ultra reliable, we need to use something called viewport, which is basically how a browser tells the rendering engine to render the elements based on the device's width. So if you have a mobile application, or so you have a web application which is displaying web content on a mobile phone, it's going to render differently. And if it's on a desktop, it's going to render differently. But if you take the browser's window and shrink its size, it's going to adapt to its layout, because the viewport keeps changing as you shrink or enlarge the browser's width. So the website responds to that. So that's why viewports are an essential thing. Including viewports is not that difficult, and if you want to take a look at how to use viewport in your examples or elements of your web design, then stick around. In the demo, we'll discuss how to do that. Then comes images. So with the advent of HTML5, there are a lot of new things that are added. One of them is called picture source sets. Basically, you can define different kinds of images that you could use on a different screen size. And that way, if your browser is loading an image that's smaller for mobile application, that would be better. On a desktop application, if you want to show larger images because smaller images would pixelate, then that would be better. So responsive images are images that scale nicely and fit to the browser size. Now, of course, we don't have images that just scale as much as we want according to the browser, so we can have different sizes of the images exported from a photo editing software such as Photoshop or some free softwares as well. Now, after doing that and getting different sizes, we can use them inside our web page to increase the responsiveness of our website. Then comes text. Text usually comprises majority of our website, mainly because text is what gives our website meaning, and web crawlers take a look at text first to understand what exactly is the content that is being displayed, which makes the content more accessible. Now, if text is not responsive and different screen sizes see the same size of text that is being displayed, then the user experience could be pretty bad. So we need to understand how to accommodate for lesser spaces because text comprises of majority of our content. And then comes media queries. So media queries is something that you can use to define completely different styles for different screen sizes. This is where screen sizes come into play. So if the screen size decreases or the screen size increases, you can change a lot of different styles, such as the background color, the size, the width, the size of the font, and many other kinds of things that could have a great impact on our layout. So we can take a look at that as well. We can also convert a multi-column layout into a single column layout when the viewport changes from a high screen width to a lower screen width or a narrower screen width. Now that we can do using media queries. So we'll take a look at that as well. And now comes time for a demo. We'll take a look at all the things that we have discussed so far. So for this demo, what I've done is I've created a few web pages. Let me just go to the first one to help you understand things. And here's the code. So let's just get started with it. So this is our HTML code. What it does, if you don't know HTML and you don't know CSS, just follow along. I'll just try and explain briefly what it's about, because this session is about understanding responsive web design and not HTML and CSS. If you want to understand more resources through which you can learn or guide your learning process, stick with me till the end of the presentation and we'll show you different learning portals and different platforms through which you can learn these things. The first thing that we do is this. This is called a meta tag. Meta tag enables a browser to understand some information about your website. It's not displayed on the screen, it's just for the browser to understand. So this is information about the information provided on your browser, which is why it's called meta tag. It has a name of viewport. So as we discussed, viewport is important, and what we tell it is the width of the content should fit the device width. So depending on how large or small the size of the screen available for us is, it should focus on that. An initial scale is 1.0, which means that I want the screen size to not be zoomed into it. It should just be what the original screen size is. And we have created images and we have said the max width should be 100% and height should be auto. This is just some for styling purposes. So now if I open up my website, as you can see, this is what it looks like. But if this is what I've done. What I've done is I've opened up my Chrome web browser, and inside my Chrome web browser, what I've done is I've opened up the developer tools. Inside it, what I can do is I can just shift it here, and now if you take a look at it, right now this is what it looks like. So it did shrink down the text instead of not responding to it, right? So that's what we want. Now let's see what if I didn't have it, what would happen then. So let's take a look at what would happen if I didn't have the viewport tags. So I go back to the code and I take the meta tag as well as the style tag. So this is what the plain it would look like. This is all commented out. Commented out means that our browsers will not take this into account when rendering our web pages. So if I refresh this, as you can see, now I have vertical scrolling. So this does not take into account the size of the screen, but however text it is, it's trying to expand the screen so that you have to scroll. So depending on how you want, you can set this up. Usually in responsive web design, we don't want vertical scroll bars. So in situations like this, if I turn this around, as you can see, the screen has no vertical scroll bars and I can just look at the content right now. So that's how that works, and it's quite useful. If I increase the screen size, it looks like this. Now we go to the second one. This is the images. Let me show you the code first so that you can understand it. So inside the images, it's everything the same. We have taken care of the viewport. We have described some of the things. Now this is what we talk about. When we're looking at HTML, usually we see this tag to enter images, but what we can do is we can define a source set as well. What it means is that this is going to be one picture. Inside it, I want these images. So img underscore small flower.jpg should be displayed when the maximum width of the screen is 600 pixels. If it's between 600 and 1500, then display 1500. If the max width is 1500, then display this image, else display this image. And by default, we're displaying img underscore flowers, which is the second one, right? So right now my screen is on full size. So it's displaying the largest available image. Now, as you can see, as soon as I stop my website, as you can see, yeah. So this is what it would look like for the for the images between 600 and 1500 pixels. If I shrink my side down, as you can see, here's the size of the width of the screen. As soon as I shrink it down below 600 pixels, it gets another image. So that's how that works. And as you can see, it's quite easy for us to understand. If I remove the browser extensions and if I close this, it takes the first image, which is quite sharp, quite large. If I do it like this, then this is what it looks like. And if it's a really small screen, then it shows us a different image. So that's how we can take care of images. Another thing that you can take a look at is that we have three images. You can have multiple images. It's not really a hard and fast rule that you have to have three images at once. You can have multiple images, and that would help a lot if you have like different screen sizes to deal with, or if you have different images to deal with, then that's really helpful, right? So now let's take a look at the third element, which is text. As you can see, this text is quite large, and that's by design. Let me just show you what the text looks like. So as you can see, I have used some inline styles. This is just for demonstration purposes. We are using the unit of VW. VW means viewport width. So as the screen size decreases and increases, the font will adapt as well. So if I open this up, right click on inspect. Yeah. So this is what it looks like. Now, as you can see, if I shrink, you can see that the text is responding to the lowering screen size, right? So as I shrink, the text is getting smaller, getting larger, depending on the width it has to fill the entire thing. It's doing its thing. So depending on what is the unit that you have chosen to describe your text, it matters how your screen is going to respond or how your text is going to respond to the screen size. So that's one way to doing it. And now the fourth element that we had discussed was media queries. So let me just show you. Media queries allow us to define certain styles for a certain size of the screen, right? So I say, okay, so this is the breakpoint of a max width of 800 pixels, right? So if my screen size gets smaller than 800 pixels, then the max width is 100%. Else everything is separated out using 20%, 60%, and 20%. So if I show it to you in code, this occupies 20% of the available space. This occupies 20% of the available space, and this occupies 60%. Now, if I, as you can see, now everything has adapted to a single column. So this is what I meant when I said that responding to using media queries, we can change the number of columns that are on our website. So many times what happens is we have multiple columns adjacent to each other in a desktop version of our website. But when the screen size decreases, stacking them on top of each other and making them into a single column layout is what's important. So that's how we've done this. And as you can see, here they have different screen proportions. The left menu and the right content have 20% and the main content has 60% of the screen width. But if I scroll below 800 pixels of width, then every of the element has 100% width. So that's how that works. Finally, I'll show you what it really takes to have a responsive website, right? So if I open it up, and this is what a simple responsive website looks like. So we have created a responsive website. Here are the links. Here is the side panel. Here is the notice board. Here's the main content. Here's the footer. So we have created all of that. Now, if you take a look at the code, it's quite large, so I'm not going to explain all of it. But what I would do is you take a look at the HTML content of it to understand what it actually does. So we have these styles established in which we tell it that the width of particular element should be how much. So we are assuming a 12 column layout, which is a standard practice. And in 12 column layout, what we do is we just display what kinds of things we want. So simple COL dash classes are going to be used for desktop. For COL, for simple classes which are below 600 pixels, we're going to use tablets. We're going to display it for tablets. And for mobile phones, all we're going to do is we're going to convert everything into a single column layout. So that's how that works. As you can see, our entire HTML content is littered with these classes, and they will adapt accordingly. So now if I open up my web browser, here's what it looks like. Let's take it to an experiment. As you can see right now, if I increase the size, everything's how it's supposed to be on a desktop screen. Scroll down. As you can see, the text is shrinking, so that's fine. Now here the text is getting a little difficult to read, and as I go shrink it even down, it snaps to the next line. So now some things are in two column layout, which is the side content and the main content, and some things are in one column layout. So since we have the screen real estate, we are doing that. If I shrink it down even further, now everything's in a single column layout. This is great for mobile website. And if you want, you can even play around with different kinds of mobile design. So if you want to take a look at how it would look on an iPhone X, here's what it would look like on an iPhone X. And you can have different kinds of screen sizes. For Pixel 2, this is what it would look like. And if everything looks fine after you've taken a look at everything, every possible device that you wish to support at your initial build, then that's how you can do that. So with that, we've come to the end of the demo. And if you have any further questions, we'll answer it now.